Welcome, everyone. This is the webinar on how to apply for the California Venues Grant Program, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. I'm Lucy Salcido Carter with Cal Nonprofits, and with that, I am going to turn things over to Jan Masaoka, the CEO of Cal Nonprofits. Jan, over to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Welcome, everybody. It is especially exciting to see all the groups here today because I've been to some of these places and heard of a lot of them. It just feels great to see that. So thanks, Lucy, for getting us started today. So just to say a little bit of a word about the California Association of Nonprofits, we say Cal Nonprofits for short. We're a statewide policy alliance, and what we do is we work in the area between nonprofits and government. So, for example, on one hand, we advocate for nonprofit funding from government, and on the other hand, we help nonprofits get funding from government. We help shape regulations, and at the same time, we help nonprofits understand regulations. And one of the things that we just did, which I'm very proud of, is we helped pass a bill in Sacramento that regulates online fundraising platforms like PayPal and GoFundMe. A lot of us just take for granted that we click on donate now and we assume that that money is going to get to the nonprofit that we donated to. But there's actually been a lot of kind of, hanky-panky between when we donate now and whether or if that money actually gets to that nonprofit. So this bill is going to ensure that there's more accountability for those platforms. And I think that helps protect every nonprofit in the state and every donor in the state as well. I want to explain our role in this particular program. We are what's called an outreach and a technical assistance partner. And what that means is that we've been identified by the sponsors of the Cal Venues program to help nonprofits and for-profits to help venues in general successfully apply for the grants in this program. So this program was actually created by California state government using tax money and through an office called the California Small Business California Office of the Small Business Advocate, Cal OSBA for short. And then they contracted with a firm, a financial services firm in Los Angeles called Lendistry. And Lendistry is the administrator of this program. So there are several of us, including Californians for the Arts, and we have a representative from that organization on today's webinar, Tara. And so CFTA and ourselves and a couple of others are outreach partners, which means we help people make successful applications, but we are not the decision makers. Lendistry is the decision maker about who actually ends up getting grants or not. This webinar and the ones that CFTA are doing are basically ways to help coach you through the process. And we're very happy that we have one of the world's experts on the Cal Venues program, Sue Siegler. Some of you may know her because she also was in charge of our program helping nonprofits apply for their relief grants. So she's very familiar with arguing case by case for nonprofits at Lendistry, and she really knows her way around systems like this. So I have three things I want you to keep in mind going forward, okay? The first one is that I'm going to ask all of you to take the time to let somebody else know about the existence of this program. A few days ago, I talked to a community-based theater in Oakland. They called me because they wanted to understand the legal steps for shutting down. They were a thriving theater until the pandemic, and they were convinced that they had to shut down. And when I told them that this program was about to be announced, it was such a huge opportunity for them, and they may not get the grant, but they may very well get the grant. And it just really brought home to me that these are real people and real theaters and real audiences that are impacted by this. So help get the word out to other people. Okay, the second thing is, be sure that you understand that these program guidelines have not yet been finalized. The program is scheduled to start tomorrow, but they haven't even confirmed yet. As of yesterday, they said they still aren't sure whether they will open tomorrow. So a lot of the kinds of information we would have hoped to be able to tell you, we're not able to tell you, but it's kind of a matter of getting as ready as we can but be alert that you're going to need to keep checking back with us and with other folks as the guidances change and evolve. And then thirdly, what was my third point? My third point is, if you're in doubt of whether or not you should apply, you should apply. Okay, so it's not that difficult on application, but stay in the game, get in the game and have a chance. And we expect there to be enough money for a great percentage of the applications to be funded. So it's not like one of those things where you're trying to get a grant where there's like one grant out of 30,000 people applying. So it's definitely worth it. Give yourself every break you can and make sure you apply. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn you over to Sue. And I also want to let you know that Sue is available by email, by telephone, and also we have a great set of FAQs that Sue has written and updates almost every day as new information comes out. So all of those are resources to you as well. And please write your questions in the Q&A box. Tara and Lucy and I will be answering them, as well as Sue answering them live. Okay, take it away, Sue. Go for it.
Thank you, Jan. Next slide, please. As Jan mentioned, we are going to be taking lots of questions later on in the webinar, so please do enter your questions into the Q&A box. And thanks to Lucy, who will be monitoring the Q&A box, and to Tara Gravis, who's with us today for Californians for the Arts as well. We're going to be presenting highlights of the program today. There is more information available both at the program website, cavenuesgrant.com, and also on our website at calnonprofits.org. As Jan mentioned, we are busy working on a list of frequently asked questions and program coaching that will be posted on our website either later today or tomorrow. There's also FAQs, other webinars, and complete program information available at cavenuesgrant.com. Because this is a new program, things are continuing to evolve with the state and with Lendistry, which is the company that administers the program from the state. So we do encourage everyone to stay up to date on what the latest developments are. We'll post on our website and the FAQs as soon as there is any additional information available. And we want everyone to know that while we are waiting to hear if the application will actually open tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Whether it does or whether it doesn't, this program is not first come, first served. The program will be open through November 19th at 5 p.m. and all applications that are received by that time will receive consideration. So you don't need to rush to apply on the very first day. Excuse me. And so tomorrow, if you don't see that application open at 9 a.m., I advise you to try back later in the day or to try next week. And that's not a question that you should direct to me, because I won't know it's open until I see it open on the website as well. But I'm available for lots of other questions. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have lots of information on our website at calnonprofits.org. This is the box that's on the right side of our website when you log in there, and you can click on that button for more about the program to find our FAQs, to find out more information about any upcoming webinars and some of our partner webinars. And also, if you'd like to schedule an individual appointment with me for 15 minutes to go over your grant application or answer any questions that you might have. We'll note that we're also going to be having a webinar on November 10th at 2 p.m. and we welcome you then. Many of you might be familiar with the Shuttered Venues program. That was a federal program. We're here today talking about the California Venues program, which is our state program. And we've gotten a lot of questions about how does the state program compare to the federal program? And the answer is we don't have that analysis available to us. So if you did already apply for or receive funding from the Shuttered Venues program, SVOG, you are eligible to apply for this program as well. But there are some differences in the qualifications, so we encourage you to stick with us and to listen carefully. Next slide, please. One of the things we want to make sure everybody knows is that unfortunately there are scammers and fraudsters out there. And part of this application is providing some of your personal data and bank information. So you want to be very sure that you're interacting with Lendistry when you do that. Applying for this grant is completely free. If anybody asks you to pay for anything, it is a scam. The communications you receive will come from lendistry.com. Or from individuals who have a name followed by lendistry.com in their email address. And the website for this program, again, is cavenuesgrant.com. And that's the only one that you should interact with. Be aware of things that might be spelled similarly, but not quite exactly that way. Next slide, please. We're going to start off this morning to review who is eligible for the program. And you can see that first bullet point there is a list of eligible business entities, which include sole proprietors, C Corp, S Corp, cooperatives, LLCs, partnerships, limited partnerships, or a 501c3 nonprofit. This program is a little different from the California Relief Grant Program, which qualified other types of 501c organizations, but for purposes of the Venues Grant, only 501c3 organizations would qualify. The business or nonprofit also has to have been operating in the state prior to June 1st, 2019, and has to have been impacted by COVID, such as having had business interruptions or even closures as a result of the pandemic. And also that organization or business can provide the required documents, and we're going to review those next. Next slide, please. So required documents to apply for this program include a state and federal tax return for 2019 and 2020. If you are a nonprofit or a business who has not yet filed your 2020 tax return, you can note that you can provide that later on. We don't yet know the final date that Lendistry will accept documents, but it does not have to be provided by November 19th. So don't let that prevent you from applying. Also, you need a copy of at least one of these forms, and you can provide all of them if they apply to you. That would be your articles of incorporation, certificate of organization, fictitious name registration, or a government issued business license. And then the person who is named as the applicant in the application will also need to provide a copy of what Lendistry calls your government issued ID, and that's generally your passport or your driver's license, and that's used for verification of identity. Excuse me. Next slide, please. We're going to talk now, next couple of slides about eligibility, because there's a lot to say about that. And I'm going to turn now to Tara Gravis to kick us off on talking about NACES codes.
Thank you, Sue. So for the purposes of the California Venues Grant Program, there are 5 NACES codes. They're here on the screen for you that are qualified NACES codes for this application. I noticed in the Q&A there are already several questions about the NACES code. What we are recommending, regardless of what NACES code you used in any prior grant application or on your taxes or anything like that, is that if one of these NACES codes is appropriate and you can comfortably apply under that NACES code, that is the NACES code that you should select. They will see your tax documents, they will see anything, and Lendistry has assured us that they will take the time to review everything and make sure it seems logical and it's a good fit. So don't worry about that. As long as it's appropriate for you, go ahead and use that appropriate NACES code.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Additionally, there are quite a number of other eligibility criteria. We have highlighted some of them here on our slides today, but it may not be inclusive of all of them. So please do go ahead and look at the eligibility criteria in the FAQs that are soon to be posted on our website and that Lendistry has posted at cavenuesgrant.com. But in general, to be eligible for this grant, your business has to have as a principal activity promoting, producing, managing, or hosting live concerts, comedy shows, theatrical productions, or other events by performing artists in an eligible venue where tickets are sold either through a cover charge or advanced ticketing, and the performers are paid. Then also, this program is for organizations that have been impacted by COVID. You're going to be asked to provide financial data for, we believe it will be calendar year rather than fiscal year. We are waiting for a firm clarification on this. But in other programs, it has been, they look at quarter 2, 3, and 4 of 2019. That's pre-COVID. And then they ask you for the same financial data for the same 3 quarters, 2, 3, and 4 in 2020. Vast majority of nonprofits and many businesses saw a drop in their income year over year, and that's as a COVID impact. So that is how the impact of COVID on your organization or business will be assessed. Next slide, please. We also have definitions for eligible venues, which would be and whether you own your venue or whether you do not. This would refer to you produce events that are in an eligible venue. So if you rent venues to produce your events, that counts as well. So a defined performance space that has at minimum mixing equipment, PA, and a lighting rig, public address system, and a lighting rig. And that when you produce your events, that you engage at least 2 or more of the following people: a sound engineer, a booking agent, a promoter, a stage manager, security personnel, or a box office manager. And that and then nonprofits also often put on free events. And so what the criteria stipulate are that the events must be promoted, produced, and managed primarily by paid staff. It cannot be an all volunteer effort. So let's give an example of maybe a small community theater where everybody's a volunteer and no one gets paid. That would not be an eligible entity. So again, the events have to be produced and managed primarily by paid staff. Next slide, please.
So can I ask a couple of quick questions that I
Sure, Jan.
So one is, so those positions, if we go back to the previous slide, those can be part-time, right?
That's correct.
Full-time.
They do not have to be full-time positions.
And then when you talked about earned income, you earned revenue, you mentioned ticket sales and sales of food and beverages. But if they also teach classes in theater, for example, would that count?
That's a good question. And I believe the answer is no, but I'm not certain. We'll look into that and make sure to add it to our FAQs.
Thank you.
Sue, are you comfortable taking more questions now? I know you still have eligibility information to provide.
I suspect that many of those will be answered as we go through it. So we'll break right after we cover and take some questions right after we finish with eligibility.
Good.
So let's see. Also, the organization or business needs to be producing eligible live events, which are defined as tickets are available to the public on average 30 days in advance of an event. We know that sometimes events pop up, but on average, at least 30 days in advance. That the performers are paid basically a market rate, which could be defined in several different ways, but in the way that performers traditionally are paid at market rate. We talked about at least 70% of the earned revenue for the nonprofit or business is generated through sales, tickets, food and beverage, merchandise, etc. And we have some questions still around sports teams, which do fit into the NACIS codes that are approved. And we know that this, if it's a sports team, that it cannot be affiliated with a major league team, meaning not being a major league team itself, nor a minor league that is owned, a minor league team that is owned by the major league. But we have a lot of questions still about other types of sports teams, and we are awaiting guidance from Lendistry on that. Again, we will put it on our website as soon as it's available. Next slide, please. Now we want to talk about entities that are not eligible. And these are some of the most common ones that we see. There is quite a long list of ineligible entities. So again, I invite you to check that on the cavenuesgrant.com website or in the FAQs on the Cal Nonprofits website. However, publicly traded corporations or those who are majority owned or controlled by a publicly traded corporation are not eligible. If the company that owns the business operates in more than 5 states or in another country, that would not be an eligible entity. And at least 75% of the gross revenue has to have been generated in California. So it's not that you can't be in multiple states, but the majority of your business has to be in California. You have to have a physical presence in the state and be headquartered in the state. And the way that Lendistry will evaluate that is by looking at what is the address on your tax return. Your tax returns have to show a California address. Government entities other than Native American tribes are not eligible, nor are businesses that primarily engage in lobbying activities or businesses who file a Schedule E on their tax returns. Unfortunately, also under this program, in general, movie theaters and museums are not eligible entities. And as I mentioned, there are some other exclusions, so please do check that out on the website. Next slide, please. And Lucy, now we'll take those questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do the venues have to have fixed seating?
That is an excellent question. I am going to guess no, but I'm going to say I don't know the answer to that definitively. Tara, do you know that answer?
The question hasn't been answered specifically, but there is no information indicating that that's required. So I would say no.
Okay, thank
That
you.
was required for for the federal program.
Yes.
So I think that's what people are sort of assuming that. Yeah, it hasn't been said, so we should assume that that it's not.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, good. What about organizations that rent venues?
Yes, they are eligible if they meet the other criteria.
Okay. And what about churches that have venues, have theaters that they rent out?
The guidelines state that your principal business activity needs to be in the performing arts. So in general, that does not allow churches or religious institutions to be eligible because while they may rent out their facilities from time to time, it is not their principal business activity.
Okay. And can nonprofits use these grants to find a new venue?
It would not be, the grant funds are not intended for purchase of a new venue. However, it can be used for rent or other types of overhead.
What about nonprofits that have a venue but primarily use volunteers, do not have paid staff?
We covered that a short time ago, that performers must be paid in order to be able to qualify, that you have to have 2 of those positions that we listed, like security personnel, box office manager, booking agent, etc. So if the organization is all volunteer, I'm afraid that they would not qualify.
What about if the people staffing those positions are independent contractors?
Independent contractors count as paid positions.
Okay, great. We have a question about what kind of evidence do the nonprofits need to provide to show that they are an eligible nonprofit venue?
We went over the list of required documents. That is what is required to be submitted with the application. The nonprofit will also have to sign an attestation, which is the application certification form. And that's available on the CA Venues Grant website. And when you go there, you'll see that there's one for nonprofits and one for for-profits. So you want to be sure that you choose the right form. When you sign off on that form and upload it with your application, you'll be signing off that everything that you provided is true and correct, and that you believe that you are eligible for this program. As Lendistry processes your application, they may have questions, and so they will contact you. They will also do things like looking at your information on GuideStar or looking at your website or anything else that might be in the public record.
Okay. And just to go over this again, because we continue to get questions, if a nonprofit owns a venue but does not produce events themselves, but rents out the space for other events, are they eligible?
Tara, I'm going to ask you if you have an inkling on this one.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, if a nonprofit has a venue but does not produce their own events using that venue, but only rents out the venue for others to use.
I'm not sure that's 100% clear, but I would encourage them to apply, because at this point we're encouraging people, even if they qualify under the events section and or under the venue section, because we want to get all the applications in we can, to bring to the legislature any discrepancies that need to be addressed.
Okay. And then is there any minimum size that the venue needs to be in order to qualify?
That's a good question, because we know that in the California Relief Grant, there was a minimum size as indicated by annual revenue. That is not a requirement for this program, nor is there a revenue cap.
What about size of venue?
That is not addressed in the guidelines either.
Okay. Well, I know we're going to have time for more questions, and I know you've got more information to cover. So let's keep going, and we'll take time for questions later.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Next slide, please. There we go. One of the questions we also get frequently asked are, what are the eligible uses of funds? And when you fill out the application, there is a drop-down menu that will ask you how you're going to use the funds. You can answer in the way that you're primarily going to use them, like employee salaries and benefits, overhead and occupancy, any costs associated with reopening, and any COVID-related costs that are not covered by other grants or programs. One of the things we want to stress is that you can't double dip. If you received, let's use for example, a payroll protection program loan, and you used that to pay your employees in September of last year, you would not be able to use venues grant funds to pay employees in September of last year, but you could use those funds to pay them, to cover the cost of paying them in a different month. So you can use similar expenses, but you can't use exactly the same ones for different grant programs. And we'll say also that one of the restrictions on the uses of funds is that it can be used to pay mortgage payments, but only if those mortgages were made prior to March 1st, 2020. It's not intended to assist in the purchase of new buildings. Next slide, please. And we talked about required documents, but I want to talk a little bit more about that. I just mentioned the application certification, and you'll need your federal and state tax returns for 2019 and 2020, all of the pages, a copy of the applicant's driver's license or passport. And let's linger here for a moment and talk about who should you name as the applicant in especially if you're in a nonprofit organization where there might be a choice of board or staff members. Every organization files what's called a statement of information with the California Secretary of State. And that statement of information will list 3 people as principals for the organization. And a named applicant in your application has to be one of those 3 principals. We'll note that the statement of information also lists the organization's agent for service, and the person who is named as the applicant can also be the agent for service on the statement of information, but cannot only be the agent for service on the statement of information. And if you want to check your statement of information, or if you need more information about what I just said, that'll be in the FAQs on our website. Additional documents that are required are financial statements, as we talked about earlier, for 2019 and 2020 that cover the second, third, and fourth quarters of the calendar year. Also, one of the following documents that we also talked about, like your organizing documents, like an articles of incorporation or certificate of organization. Nonprofits, of course, need to include their IRS tax exempt letter. And as I mentioned, that California Secretary of State filing. And in this case, showing that the business was operating prior to June 1st, 2019. This program is not intended for new businesses or nonprofits. It is limited to those that were in operation on or before June 1st, 2019. I'll also mention that the way that the application works is that you'll need your documents available in PDF format. They will only be accepted in PDF format, with the only exception being the personal identification, the driver's license or passport for the applicant. That can be a JPEG or a PDF. So as you get your documents together, you want to make sure that you're saving electronic copies as a PDF. And there is a maximum document size of 15 megabytes. And sometimes, particularly tax returns might be longer than that by the time you've included all the schedules. If that's the case, you have a choice of either compressing that document, if you know how to do that, or you can break it into two and label it appropriately. Think 2019-990 Part 1 and 2019-990 Part 2, for example. Next slide, please. The big question everybody wants to know is, how much can I get in a grant award? And the grant amounts are fixed at either 20% of the gross earned revenue that you had in California in 2019. So you take a look back at your 2019 gross revenue, but the grant amount will be based on the earned portion of that. So think of the things that you had, like ticket sales and again, sales of those things we listed before, like food and beverage or merchandise. And that would be earned revenue. So you can get 20% of that or a maximum of $250,000. Now, whatever award amount you are eligible for, well, if you already received a California relief grant, will be reduced by the amount of that grant. If you already received a California relief grant, the amount would have been between $5,000 and $25,000. And so that is because these are both state programs. And so, but it does not cover any private funds you might have gotten, like if you got grants from, say, foundations or corporations or individuals. It doesn't cover any municipal or county COVID relief program. It is only if you received another state grant for COVID relief that would be deducted from your award amount. Next slide, please. We've got a few application tips for you as you go through the application. As I mentioned earlier, this program is not first come, first served. So there's no, you don't have to rush to apply on the first day. All applications that are submitted by November 19th at 5 p.m. will be considered. And on the application, you need to give a physical address. PO boxes are not allowed. If you use a PO box typically for US mail in your nonprofit or business, know that you can also give a staff or board member's home address. Lendistry does not communicate with its applicants via US mail. The purpose of giving a physical address is that they're required to verify that there is a verifiable physical address associated with each application. For those of you who might have applied in multiple rounds of the California Relief Grant Program, you'll know why I say it's okay to use the same email address as you did in the Relief Grant Program. These are two separate programs, and it's okay to use that email address again. Please use a standard email address, meaning something like your name at a domain that's easily recognizable as perhaps associated with you. So what is not okay to put in are email addresses that start with things like info@ or no reply. Those are generally flagged in the Lendistry system as spam. And for nonprofits, when you open up that application, you're going to see the word owner all over it. It's going to ask for the owner's name and the owner's address. And know that the owner equals the applicant for Lendistry's purposes. Lendistry knows that nonprofit organizations don't have owners, so please don't get hung up on that. And then we'll also mention that the applicant's personal data will be requested. And by that, I mean date of birth and social security number. Let's talk for a moment about what Lendistry does with that personal data. Excuse me. It is used to verify your identity because Lendistry engages in vigorous anti-fraud measures, including rigorous verification of the identity of the individual applying. The way that they do that is using a company called Plaid. They will pull a soft credit, what's called a soft credit check. This does not appear as a credit check on the individual's credit record. It is merely used to verify identity. For many nonprofit organizations, it's very unusual to be asked for that type of personal data for the applicant, but it is required for this program. And we're also asked often about, will I be able to print or save a copy of my application when I get to the end of the form? And the answer on that is no. So if you'd like to save your work as you go along, go ahead and take a screenshot of each page as you complete it. And again, you want to complete that application by November 19th at 5 p.m. However, you need to complete the part that you fill out online. Once you complete that, you have met the application deadline. You can still go back and upload documents after the deadline on November 19th. However, we urge everyone to upload their documents as soon as possible. Lendistry can't process your application without all of your documents. And they don't know, they haven't given us yet what the final date is that documents will be accepted. But the earlier you can provide them, the better your chances of getting a grant. And also, we strongly recommend that you do not try to do this application in any other browser except for Google Chrome. If you typically use something like Safari or Internet Explorer, those browsers tend to return errors or freeze up when you're using the application. So we strongly recommend only access the application, whether you're applying now or later on when you go to log back in, when you're using the Google Chrome browser. And there are other tech tips that are included in the FAQs that'll be on our website that we really encourage everybody to read because they'll help you move through the application more easily and troubleshoot if you do have any problems with it. And once your application is submitted, you cannot make any changes by logging in and changing anything. If you made an error or need to correct something, you have to call Lendistry directly and ask them to assist you with that. Next slide, please. And here's how the process works once you are applying. Again, you go to cavenuesgrant.com and look for, the button isn't live yet, so we don't know exactly what it's going to say. It'll say click here to apply or something similar, apply now. And first, you're going to create an account. When you click on there, it'll take you to a page where you create a username and password. And then you fill out the online application using the information that we have talked about today. Again, that's all organized in the FAQs that will be on our website that have a section that say, here's the documents you need and here's the information you need to gather. Once you've completed the online application, you can go ahead and upload your documents. Lendistry will review the application and may ask you for additional information when it's being processed. You can log back in anytime you like and check your application status. So make a note or bookmark the address for the application. It'll be the same one that you go back to check on later on, will be the same one that you used to apply. Once you'll know that you're approved for funding, once you receive a grant agreement in your email via DocuSign. That is the last step before you are funded. And once you sign that, then you are on your way and you just have to wait for your funds to arrive in your bank account, which we can't really tell you exactly how long that's going to take because everybody's financial institution is different. but it's generally within several weeks. A note about bank accounts, which is that you will be asked on the Lendistry application to provide your login credentials for your bank account. Again, that's uncomfortable for many people, but it is required. Lendistry does not send paper checks nor wire transfers. Your bank account information will go to that company I mentioned called Plaid. Plaid is, I'm told, a company that provides secure transaction services for major companies like Visa. What I can say is that there were hundreds of thousands of applications to the relief grant program, and I'm unaware of anybody's information having been compromised as a result of providing it through this application process. And I will also say that we also get a question about, are there going to be reporting requirements? And the answer is we don't know. Lendistry hasn't provided us with that information. What they generally recommend is retain your records that might pertain to this grant for at least 3 years, which is something that certainly nonprofits typically do, and most businesses as well. And if we receive any information about reporting requirements, we would certainly put that into our FAQs. And now we're going to turn back to Lucy and say, Lucy, do we have more questions?
We do indeed. I think there's still quite a bit of confusion around the earned revenue and the 70%. Can you just go over again that information about, in order to be eligible, what percent of earned revenue needs to be, what percent of overall revenue needs to be earned revenue? First of all, let's start there.
Gotcha. So that 70% is an important number. And what Lendistry will do is they're going to look at your gross income, all your income sources from your as reported on your 2019 taxes. And then they're going to say, is your earned revenue from activities associated with arts performances or events at least 70% of your gross revenue. So that is a basic qualification. You have to have been showing at least 70% of your overall revenue as earned revenue for purposes of qualifying for this grant.
Great. And then we have some questions about what counts as earned revenue with it for that 70%. Are venue rental fees included in that?
They are.
Okay. And let's see. Okay, I think we've answered some of those questions. Let me jump to some other questions, and then I'm going to find some of the other earned revenue questions for you.
Sure.
So let's see.
I can tell we've got a lot of questions today, which is good.
We do, and some of them are being answered in writing too. I do want to remind people that we will be sending all of the slides and a link to the recording. We had that question, so all this information will be available later to
And
you.
also, just in case you forgot this, if you go to the Q&A box, it has 3 tabs: open, answered, and dismissed. And so if you look on the answered tab, a lot of questions have been answered there. So and thank you, Tara, for answering some of them also. And also, I didn't know this was going to happen, but Patrice, who is actually from Lendistry, is also answering questions there. So thank you, Patrice. And it's a great resource, that box itself.
Okay, great. Can you clarify again the questions around paid performers versus paid staff helping with production? So if you have paid staff helping with production, but you do not have paid performers, are you still eligible?
Guidelines do say that performers have to be paid.
Okay.
I thought this was an interesting one. What if they are not paid in cash, but for example, they get tuition to a school?
You know, that is not addressed in the guidelines. So I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so.
What about if it's a youth theater, their youth performers are not paid, but musicians are hired for the orchestra and they are paid? Are they eligible?
I would say go ahead and apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. Jan, do you have another question? I'm scrolling here.
I know there's like too many to sometimes be figured out.
And
I do think we've had at least a couple people ask this question, which we're going to have to look into, which is if you get income from classes, does that count as earned income? It seems to me that it is earned income because that's not excluded from the in the income list. But it's worth if that is your case, I think you should apply. But we'll also look into it more. And
Here's a slightly different question, but how long do recipients of the grant have to spend their grant?
Again, we don't have guidance on that yet.
Okay, good. I think for some of this information, people are hearing about it for the first time, so it's helpful to hear it at least twice.
Sure,
So,
sure.
and again, what about using the grant to purchase a venue?
That is not an eligible use of these grant funds.
Okay. All right. How are we doing time-wise?
probably not enough to buy one anyway, given California real estate prices.
Okay.
I do think that just on the editorial side, a couple of people in the Q&A box have made the point that many nonprofit arts organizations do not get 70% of their income from earned income. It's often the other way around, that they get 30% from earned and 70% from contributions. So but contributions, as we all know, are driven by performances and by being open. So I think that, that's an example of a policy that I think could have been better. We shouldn't necessarily, but that nonetheless,
Absolutely.
that is the way it is.
Yeah, yes. So thank you for those comments though, and we'll keep that in mind. So what if the mixing equipment and lighting rigs are brought in by the paid performers? Would that still work to qualify the organization as a venue?
I don't know of any regulation that says that you need to own those. It says the venue has to have them. It doesn't address whether it is owned, rented, or belonging to someone else. I think that the point is that that equipment is used in the productions.
Okay. And then we have a question about deferred payments to actors. I'm assuming that would be fine if they're going to be paid at some point. That would still qualify.
I don't know anything about not paying the actors. I'm sorry. That was supposed to be a joke.
It's the union allows them to defer payment, they're saying. So
thank you for that clarification. If the actors are paid, there's nothing in the regulations that addresses when they need to be paid.
Right.
Okay, good. And then if you could just clarify again, I know you did state that movie theaters, art venues that include multiple kinds of events, live events as well as theaters, are they still eligible?
That is a good question. I would encourage them to apply.
Okay.
Here's one I'm not sure that we got to. For the decline of 70% or more, does that have to be all 3 periods, or is it 3 periods combined? Or if you were in only one of those 3 quarters that you had a 70% decline?
It will be year over year, so it will be those 3 quarters combined for each of those 2 years.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did we tell them there was going to be a test?
It's not too late for any other questions you might have.
Well, I also want to remind people that if you didn't feel that your questions were answered, you can email and telephone Sue after this webinar. That's what she's there for, is to talk over individual questions with people. So please feel free to do that.
We also are going to be having another webinar, at least one other webinar during the period of the grant program. So it will, and as we have more information, we'll be updating our information. Sue, can you just go over again the museum eligibility information?
I'm sorry that in general, museums are not eligible.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I think we're at a good stopping point for now. And again, stay tuned for our FAQs and updates on the information.
That's right. Next slide, please. And so I'll say thank you to everybody who's joining us here today, whether they are on the slide or not. In particular, Jan and Lucy, Tara and Patrice, who have been helping us out with the Q&A. And I'll turn it back over to Jan. And also to our staff, also to our staff, Henry and Christine. Thank you for supporting us today.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. Patrice, especially, it was a treat to have you. And Tara, thanks so much for joining us. We love partnering with CFTA and on this and lots of other things over the years. And thank you, Lucy and Sue, as well as our off-camera staff, Henry and Christine. I just want to reiterate, you should apply and you should encourage somebody else to apply. I think we all have a responsibility, to all of us in the performing arts community, and we want to make sure that we help each other out, not just help ourselves. And don't forget to check our FAQs and to call or email Sue when you're with your questions. And as Lucy said, we will be having another webinar on November 10th, and hopefully we'll have more definitive answers for you, because a lot of the questions that we haven't been answered yet, so we'll be able to give you more answers to those. So have a great rest of your day, and let's go get that money.